Parsons reduction turbines that the ship is fitted with. We believe that they're the only in situ turbines of this era left anywhere in the world. They were quite unique and at the forefront of engineering at their time, particularly because of the design of them, and you'll note that there isn't a separate gearbox. Everything is contained within this turbine. They're driven by steam. It's best described as a turbine is rather like looking at the front of a jet engine at a city airport, and of course it's the steam pushing against the fan blades inside these turbines that spins them, and then from that spins the shaft with the propeller at the stern. The ship has 4 shafts. Each shaft has its own turbine, and here on my left hand side is one of the condensers which basically converts the used steam back to water so it can be used again in the boilers. About 40,000 shaft horsepower. They would push this ship at about 28 knots. On time trial when she was built in 1914, she was actually recorded at 29.5 knots, which is absolutely phenomenal for a steam-powered, oil-fired ship. That was almost unheard of. Indeed, a modern warship today generally runs around at not much more than 29-30 knots. So to be doing this almost 100 years ago is absolutely amazing. She carried somewhere between 500 and 1,000 tons of fuel oil in various tanks around the ship, some to each side of the engine room, and indeed we're standing on top of some more of her oil fuel tanks as well.
And there was no ship-to-ship refuelling in those days. When fuel got low, she had to return to port, which meant if she was involved in an engagement, she still had to return to port.
Yes, that's very true. It's a comparatively modern technique to refuel at sea. She would have had to have come alongside and taken fuel from shore supply. If she would have been going into action, she would have been ensured that she would have been totally fueled before sailing for that action. But on a long patrol, yes, she would have been worried about fuel, not only from the point of view of her endurance and being able to operate in action, if you like, but of course as you're using up the fuel, you have to replace it with seawater or you start to have stability problems as well.
And we're actually below the waterline here as well.
We are, yes.
So
yes.
If she was torpedoed, this was absolutely the place you didn't want to be?
Absolutely the place you didn't want to be. As you've discovered yourself, access to and from this engine room is quite difficult at the best of times. So if you're at sea, rolling around, heavy weather, or torpedoed and the water's coming in, there'll be steam, you're going to have casualties from steam burns, and you've got to get out. Not a good place to be.
There apparently is a ghost in the engine room in Caroline. This was seen by one of the ratings a great many years ago, and he gave a fairly fair description of what he saw. And it turned out that one of the salient parts about the thing was that this ghost had his cap on and a wing collar, which wasn't very common, and this particular rating wouldn't have known that that was the way officers of days gone by were dressed. And it was eventually and subsequently found out that in actual fact somebody had either died or was killed in the engine room. And nobody's ever seen since, but possibly the reason for that is there's never anybody in the engine rooms now. They were restored by a very keen staff officer a number of years ago, but he didn't report seeing anybody there.
Well, Martin, we're down the steering compartment of the ship now. Just explain what went on here.
Okay, Pete, this compartment is right at the aft end of the ship, about as close to the back of the ship as you can get. It's underwater, so it's surrounded by water on the top. There are 2 propellers below us, would have been, sort of action stations churning away, creating huge amounts of noise. This compartment would have been manned in action stations by up to 12 men. So 6 to turn the wheels, 2 for instructions, 1 for supervision, and a spare man in case somebody went over. The heat down here would have been quite fierce. The hatch would have been sealed because we're below the waterline, so if the ship took any damage, they wouldn't have been able to get out quite easy. This would have been a horrendous place for these men to be at action stations. Lots of noise, everything else going on at the same time. Quite a frightening place. So down here, they would have been listening for orders and ready for any mechanical breakdown whatsoever to keep the ship fighting and floating and moving. That was their job. You needed the best men that you had down here.
No visual references below the waterline. There'd been quite a lot of movement here, so seasickness would have been a problem.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, most men can train their minds to avoid seasickness, but in really bad conditions on a difficult day, with the lights flickering on and off, it only takes one man to be ill, and that can set the rest off. So it would have been quite dreadful.
I was a part of the permanent staff, and our task here was to, apart from maintaining the car, was to train the R&Rs for seagoing duties. That involved maintaining the minesweeper, because each division, there was 11 divisions in the UK, and each had a minesweeper attached to it. And our main task was to maintain the minesweepers.
You got the boat ready for sea for the R&Rs to use, and when it came back, you fixed what they managed to break. Plus, you had a planned maintenance system. All warships have a planned maintenance system, so there's daily stuff, weekly stuff, monthly stuff.
You would get faults, but they wouldn't tell you how it came about, so they concocted a story. So when you went to rectify the defect, you say, well, it can't be that, it can't be that. So it actually made your job a little bit more difficult than if it had told you the truth at the start.
Our commander, MCM 10 commander, used to say, our job is they bend and we mend.
Well, Martin, here we are in the wardroom in HMS Caroline. This part of the ship would have been exclusive to the officers.
The wardroom, as we call it in the naval service, is where the officers dined. It's where they would have had their recreation, some easy chairs, and they would have been served their meals here by the wardroom stewards. Other members of the ship's company would only have been allowed into this area either if they were on duty or by special permission. It was exclusively the officers' territory.
In Caroline's long history, this room's seen some pretty amazing parties.
It's seen some great mess dinners. Every year we celebrate the Battle of Trafalgar. That's a naval tradition for the last 200 plus years. We have been known to have the odd party as well, and some fairly unique games as well. Dinners for us are all very formal. We wear our best uniforms, our medals, sort of the best china, everything we can to commemorate our heritage and our traditions in the naval service, which go back several hundred years. That's why we're called the senior service. In terms of our party games, Caroline is famous for one, and that's called the Scuttle Run. Scuttle Run is something that takes place normally or used to take place, normally when drink had been taken and people were feeling a little bit braver. And it involved the willing participants going out through a scuttle, such as this, body and all, up onto the upper deck above us, across to the other side of the ship, back in through a porthole similar to this, or a scuttle on either side into the wardroom, and it was a timed run. If you lost bits of uniform or damaged yourself on the way, that was your fault. This suite of cabins was built just before the outbreak of the Second World War, when it looked as though war was quite imminent, and the Royal Navy realised that HMS Caroline would have a fundamental role to play in terms of port operations and controlling shipping. They needed to modify the ship again. They'd built the drill hall in 1924, and now they needed to accommodate the senior officer. So they took away some of the structure from the after gun deck, which is what this cabin sits on, and they built this structure. So it's been here for over 70 years. It contains this cabin, which is where the captain and his senior officers would have gathered and worked as he required, a dining cabin, a night cabin for him to sleep and change in, and also a small bathroom just behind the night cabin. So totally self-contained, and the captain could have stayed here for as many weeks as he needed to get the job done during the Second World War.
A lot of information traffic going through here, very secretive, very hush-hush, a lot of security.
That's right. The ship wasn't located where she is at the moment. She was over on the other side of the harbour in Milewater Basin, which was a secure location for her. But from there, the port admiral and the captain in command of the ship at the time would have known what was going on and what needed to be done. This was the home of the Royal Navy as such in Northern Ireland at that time.
Well, Martin, we're in the drill hall now aboard HMS Caroline. Behind us, Caroline's battle honours. Just talk us through those.
Battle honours are awarded to a ship if she has been engaged in a battle. You couldn't just be close to it, you actually had to be part of it. The previous ship, HMS Caroline, was in service around about Nelson's time, about 1805, 1806. And in the few years after Trafalgar, that ship won 3 different battle honours. This ship, of course, was commissioned in 1914, and she won her sole battle honour at the Battle of Jutland in June 1916. In that battle, the greatest battle at sea during the First World War, fought between the Royal Navy and the German High Seas Fleet. The two fleets engaged each other at the Heligoland Bight, which is off the coast of Denmark. A large battle ensued between the major warships and some of the smaller ones. And after the battle had ended, the Germans always claimed a victory because they'd sunk more Royal Navy ships. However, they were the ones that went back into port and never came out again to pose a threat to the Royal Navy, therefore allowing Britannia to rule the waves for the remaining 2 years of the First World War. She had her claim to fame in what was really an hour or two of action on the second day of the battle, when she was told to engage a larger ship than herself with torpedoes. She got in as close as she could dare get in, fired torpedoes, then tried to get away and came under direct fire. But she lived to tell the tale, and that's how we come to see her here today.
Here we are on the quarterdeck of HMS Caroline, where in a few weeks the final acts of her naval career will be played out.
Well, on the 31st of March, Pete, it will be the very last ceremony ever held on board this ship. It is the Navy's opportunity to say goodbye to her as she passes into her next life, which is hopefully going to be as a museum. On that day, there'll be a formal ceremony here. Our own Admiral will be here, some local VIPs, people we wish have been good to the ship, good to the ship's company. And then after that ceremony, we'll be laying up her ensign in St Anne's Cathedral, so it will be there for many, many years to come for people to go and reflect and have quiet moments, particularly those who've served in the ship. So there will still be a lasting memory, but in a quieter place than the harbour.
She's been here so long, she's part of the skyline basically in Belfast, and we've all just grown accustomed to her being here, and just so many people have passed through Naval Reserve and so on and so forth, and with cadets, and really it's just part of Belfast and should be retained as part of Belfast.
I think it's a really sad day. You know, we're standing here in the shadow of the great cranes and, you know, in the area where the Titanic left these shores. And for another ship to leave here that has such a tradition and history connection with Belfast would be very sad. 97 years of service, and we should retain it here as part of our maritime history, I feel. And there is a will there, but whether there's the money to retain it, I'm not sure.
Belfast has been this ship's home for most of her life. The thousands who've served on it are all local men and women. Caroline is a national treasure. She is an historic ship in her own right, and she's on the preservation list. She's the maritime equivalent of a Grade 1 listed building, so she needs to be preserved for the future. It's the Navy's intention to do that by passing her into ownership of the National Museum of the Royal Navy, so she'll have proper care, proper custodianship. The only thing that isn't yet certain is where her final home will be.